Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Paz from the Two-Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me is my co-host, the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, John. Before we kick things off, like officially, I wanted to mention a piece of serious news. As we know, GoFundMe can be an important platform for certainly even in the wrestling business when people face unexpected difficulties. We certainly saw that with Ali Catch's unfortunate injury at GCW. But in another piece of serious news, I came across Jessie Jones Smothers, actually Tracy Smothers' daughter, who's on WOW, is currently fighting breast cancer. So there's a GoFundMe in support of her. So I was recently tweeting that. And if you're listening, certainly what more important cause or equally important cause could you find? So please find that, share it, and let's support the community, even if you may not be familiar with her work. I'm sure you received much enjoyment from Tracy Smothers, no matter what year you started watching. So please support his family.
Well said, Lavie. Now, as far as getting to the news here, we'll start off with a little bit of Bushi Road. What is going on? What is the latest from Bushi Road?
So, sometimes we're able to look at snippets of Bushi Road's health as a company. We could look at the stock and say, oh, it's down X number of points. And certainly Fight Opinion on X can do a good deep dive to give us a sense about the company. But Simply Wall Street had a little piece that looked at their financials, which I thought was interesting. It might get a little bit heavy in terms of yen numbers, but I think after 2 minutes overall, we'll have a better picture of their financial health. So I'm just going to go over that for a couple moments. So via Simply Wall Street, what is Bushi Road's net debt? Bushi Road has 15.4 B yen of debt as of September, which is about the same as the year before. However, its balance sheet shows it holds 24.6 B in cash, so it actually has 9.25 B net cash. We can see from the most recent balance sheets that Bushi Road have liabilities of 14.9 falling due within a year and liabilities of 10.6 due beyond that. On the other hand, it had cash of 24.6 and 6.19 worth of receivables due within a year. So it actually has 5.34 more liquid assets than total liabilities. It's good to see that Bushi Road has plenty of liquidity on its balance sheet, suggesting conservative management of liabilities. Due to its strong net asset position, it's not likely to face issues with its lenders. Simply put, the fact that Bushi Road has more cash than debt is arguably a good indication that it can manage its debt safely. In fact, Bushi Road's saving grace is its low debt levels because its EBIT has tanked 75% in the last 12 months. Falling earnings, if the trend continues, could eventually make even modest debt quite risky. Ultimately, the future profitability of the business will decide if Bushi Road can strengthen its balance sheet over time. So, what does this all mean? So, first, again, to summarize, they have more cash on hand than debt. And even if the business continues, to falter overall, they're involved in a number of businesses. New Japan is just one small part of it, or even their whole wrestling element wrapped into one, the Stardom, some of their kickboxing investments and all that sort of thing. They're still a small part of Bushi Road. But if they don't increase revenues, even if you don't have too much debt and you have liquid amount of cash, you could get in trouble. So eventually they're going to have to right the ship. But according to this, there's not a reason to be concerned just because they've been conservative in holding on to cash.
Now, as far as TNA wrestling is concerned, what's going on there? Is there some more movement going on as far as their structure behind the scenes? What's the latest with TNA wrestling?
What's interesting, and not to start any rumors or anything like that, I'm just sort of like a little bit obsessive about checking their website, their executives list, because it had moved around a lot, and they tended to update it a lot. But since naming their newest executive several weeks ago at this point, I haven't seen them update the website. So just something interesting to note. I'll be continuing to watch that for sure. But one of the other pieces that came out recently, which had been rumored for a while, was TNA going to Full Sail. I think we mentioned it last week, but some more came out about this. This is a deal that the promotion has been working on for months, dating back to when Lou DeAngeli was with the company. Sabor, Full Sail's executive director, head of partnerships, was formerly with WWE and was heavily involved, as well as TNA's current management, in making the deal. There were rumblings over the last few days the deal has been completed. TNA has been planning for additional live event broadcast of Impact, so I expect additional dates at Full Sail as the year goes on. We'd reported last year the company was looking at a potential permanent home for the series. Certainly, Full Sail would be the perfect landing point. WWE NXT taped regularly at Full Sail until the COVID-19 pandemic, at which point they shifted to the nearby Performance Center. WWE also taped a season of Tough Enough from the university. So apologies, I forgot to cite where this came from exactly, but I believe it's Fightful. Interestingly, as well as Jordan Grace, as we know, of course, leaving TNA, going to WWE makes a lot of sense, but I thought it was all, smooth sailing. But interestingly, executive change really influenced her decision, as she noted in a recent interview. When he left, I was very emotional, like a lot of people. It was so out of the blue. Of course, referencing Scott D'Amore, we found out on a Zoom call. It was very corporate, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But at the time, I was like, I only really signed here because I had faith in Scott that he was going to do good things for me and the company. He is the one that kind of set in motion the whole rebirth of TNA. I told them I wanted my contract to be cut. Basically, it was supposed to be until October. And I was like, I want to get out in January. Kudos to them. They heard me and they let me. I'm very lucky for that. Probably I'd still be at TNA. It's a testament to them as a company hearing a talent say, I'm not happy, I want this. I feel lucky in this regard. So I think that was a smart move from TNA. Of course, you have to be strategic in terms of how you let people go, who you let go when they request this. I think that's something Tony Khan is still finding a way to balance. But I think a good thing for the talent is that this new relationship with WWE and TNA doesn't appear to be where WWE says, like, to existing TNA talent, stay where you are and we'll sort of call you as we need you, sort of like placing the talent on a lower tier, but still benefiting from their exposure, that they can still basically flow up to WWE, and there's no restrictions there. So looking at TNA's forthcoming schedule, so on February 20th and 21st, they'll be, of course, in Full Sail, a live event. Then in mid-March, they'll be in El Paso, Texas, on March 28th and 29th in St. Joseph, Missouri, Rebellion in LA, and then, of course, Slammiversary in Elmont, New York. So now just looking at the ticket sales or ticket trajectory. So Full Sail, obviously it's a very small venue. At the moment, which is a few weeks out, and obviously it hasn't been announced for very long, the tickets, I would think, would go quickly. They haven't yet. I imagine it'll be full by that time, but partly it might be trying to maximize the revenue. Nothing wrong with that. But the most expensive tickets are $152. So it's certainly, especially the first time they come to Full Sail, it is like a unique, special thing. So to go for maximizing that seems like a good idea. $77 to the next tier, $52, and then $32, as Dave Meltzer would call it, at the get-in price. El Paso on March 14th. In terms of the reserved tickets, which is just a few rows, but they look like they're doing really well in that regard. And then there's a large GA section. It's a pretty big venue. In St. Joseph at the Civic Arena in late March, looks like plenty of tickets remaining at the moment. I think it was PW Insider that had written that TNA was thrilled with Rebellion tickets thus far in LA. It's hard to tell just because there's so much GA tickets available. Although in terms of what was available, when you go to the website, it says few tickets remaining. They can certainly open up many more, but it's something curious to find out eventually. But in terms of the reserve, there's a fair amount of tickets left in that modest reserve section. Now, in terms of Slammiversary, WrestleTix, who of course we rely upon a great deal, had like a little caveat before sharing the numbers. I held off on updating for a few extra days to see if any seats would reappear in the highlighted sections. Of the seats that dropped off, most were located in the middle of those sections for some reason. I'll continue to monitor. So when you see like a pattern that repeats itself in terms of ticket sales, where like the ends of a row might be available, but the middle is gone, it's hard to count that as like tickets distributed or sold. So more investigation to come. But currently, tickets distributed is over 2,000, 2,038 in its current setup of 4,101. Of course, the venue is what is it, 16,000 seats or more. So just something interesting to note, but TNA certainly keeping it interesting this year in terms of attendance, as it was last year.
Now, GCW has a ton of shows coming up. What's going on with GCW?
Of course, they have to fulfill their Triller commitment, so there's going to be a fair amount of shows on the books, but otherwise there certainly would be anyway. So first to note that Effie's on a hot streak, although I think London was sold out in advance of his winning the title. But his first two events as champion internationally were sold out. So take the win in that regard. In terms of in France and in London in the Electric Ballroom. So nice momentum, and probably a good idea to have like a little bit breather from the States as well, as sort of people get to experience something different from the People versus GCW, which got so much attention. But just to run through the shows, and then we'll take a look at the ticket sales as much as we have it, or at least get a sense of what they look like. Up all night, of course, everyone's in, well, not everyone, but a fair amount of things are passing through Indianapolis. So GCW is as well, which tends to be a strategy that works well for them. January 31st, the Jersey City J-Cup with their sub-brand JCW two-nighter coming up in mid-February. National City, California at the end of the month. Beginning March, we have LA, Mesa, Arizona. Mid-month, back to Atlantic City. End of the month in Chicago. And then in Vegas, as we've talked about, a number of shows there during WrestleMania season. Post Vegas, we're starting to learn more. In July, they'll be in Dallas, and then already announced, which is a little bit of a different thing, which we talked about in September, is Bloodsport back to London. But let's take a look at a little bit of the ticket sales. So certainly benefiting from Royal Rumble weekend. Just general admission tickets remaining in Indianapolis, a few rows deep in terms of reserved tickets. So looks like a win already for them. In National City, California, probably the rest of the shows that I'll mention, ticket sales look slow at the moment. But we'll have to see what happens at the end. In National City, it looks like a small venue, as there's just ringside reserved and GA available. Both remain. LA has second row and beyond tickets available at the moment. That tends to pick up well. March 2nd, the Nile Theater, second row remaining and more. March 15th, second row and more remaining. Interestingly, just announced on March 30th in Pop's nightclub in the St. Louis market, they're featuring JCW showcase matches. So interesting to see that relationship to continue to develop with our friends Brett Lauderdale and Violent J coming together. It makes sense. I think JCW certainly has a lot of appeal and attention it could get to the Juggalo community. I guess similar to Lucha Libre. I don't know if anyone's made this comparison before, but similar to Lucha Libre, it has to be sort of like enough to appeal, where people who may not go to the general show would come out in support of that type of show. You just can't like throw a JCW match or a lucha match and expect those fans to show up. They're looking for something authentic to their brand, at least partially. And it was interesting when Brett Lauderdale and GCW announced the collective. He sort of said, "This is only half of what we're doing," and it was sort of like what else can you guys be doing? So now we're starting to learn. One of the things, if there's more coming, one of the things is Dragon Gate USA has the Rebirth show, which is taking place in the same hotel but a different part of the venue. But it has the branding for Triller, for the collective, for GCW.
What about MLW? What's the latest with MLW?
So MLW, in terms of their forthcoming shows, and we'll take a look at that more specifically in a moment, but on February 8th is Atlanta. On April 5th is Battle Riot in Commerce, California. On May 10th in Cicero. And on September 13th in North Richmond Hills. So venues that we're all very familiar with from MLW's past. An interesting thing about content distribution and smart idea for MLW to get things out there as much as they can, and hopefully that has a bit of revenue attached to it as well. PW Insider reports that Stadium now airs MLW content. This network has gone through several iterations and is fairly well distributed on Fast. So, John, I don't know if you remember when Stadium first came out, but that was actually a Sinclair endeavor. It was one of their digital networks, and they quickly teamed with other sports affiliated companies, and then a number of the major league sports got involved, but ultimately it's ended up being lower profile, owned by somebody else, but pretty well distributed in terms of the fast world. So about Stadium, reach of over 165 million subscribers across YouTube, Amazon, Samsung, Roku, Fubo, and others. Stadium is an interactive sports broadcasting network that mixes the power of fan engagement with great talent-led content. But looking now back to their live event, so WrestleTix has a count of center stage, 567 tickets distributed of a potential 772. As we're recording this, about 8-9 days out, so pretty good position. If it's not sold out, it'll be close there, so that's certainly a win. Hearing a lot of positivity about Commerce, California for Battle Riot. It's a little bit hard to tell. Based on the map, as tickets tend to have a pattern look to them beyond the third row, and then in the back rows there's like a few single seats and like a pair together, but it's hard to tell if anything was sold in the middle of that. So we'll see when we can see some streams of that or some arena shots of that on May 10th in Cicero. Thus far, it looks really good in terms of tickets distributed, and certainly very early for Dallas, but a high watermark that they've set there most recently, and at least one show prior to that did really well. So MLW seems to have the right formula in terms of venue selection right now, and doing well in the limited amount that they go on the road to record. But things like Stadium help bring in a little bit of visibility, but maybe still sort of searching for what's their core, where will they land, and what's their relevancy to today's market.
Now, how about your favorite topic of all time, here and there? What's the latest in the world of wrestling? Just here and there.
Yes, and John, I was gonna add to it. I was gonna say a lot of here and there this time. I was borderline. I was gonna put maybe a number of subtopics, but I know we like here and there. So here it is quickly. So Chris Jericho did a recent interview, I think for TV Insider, You're the Ring of Honor champ right now. What do you see for the future of the brand? One challenge I see is having a full distinctive roster separate from AEW. I know that it comes down to finding a bigger viewing platform for the company. So I think the fact that Tony Khan put the title on me again is because Chris Jericho, as Ring of Honor World Champion, streaming platforms, I'm emphasizing the word streaming platforms might pay more attention to it. I know Tony's working on that, and it's a couple of offers. I don't know if they are on an offer he wants. I think he wants to try and expand those offers. I'm 1,000% sure they'll continue to work to get a streaming deal, because when he sets his mind on something, he usually makes it happen. He's invested fully in the Ring of Honor brand and product. I have no doubt there'll be a bigger platform for Ring of Honor at some point. Distribution seems to be sort of like the golden answer that so many companies are looking for. Interestingly, to hear streaming, I feel like for so long we heard TV deal. John, to me, like I knew that, or I felt at least, in terms of the Warner and brand and all of that, like when I heard that they were going to replay, Dynamite on True TV, I was like, okay, that's what they chose instead of Ring of Honor, which makes a lot of sense because it's already content that's proven. There's somewhat of an interest in terms of watching the replay. You don't have to invest more in production or anything like that, and it's a known brand. John, do you remember this when there was talk that Tony Khan had interest from like the CW, and they actually wanted to talk to him, but he wasn't interested in talking to them?
Yes.
Which is amazing because, like, look how stunningly successful, NXT has been.
Yep.
Even, and it seems to be gaining more and more momentum, even without, obviously down from episodes that had an episode that had The Rock, but like they've settled at a pretty high watermark, given the network and the state of viewership this year. And I've been a long time advocate for AEW, even having pursued that, especially when there's more ownership and investment, from the same media company that they worked with. So I think that was like very stubborn and short-sighted from Tony Khan to miss out, on that opportunity. And perhaps it is, and not to lean on this. And I think people keep using it sort of like as a bully element, like because he's wealthy, but I don't mean in that way. But I think like he did have that comfort where you don't have to like worry about the exact bottom line. Obviously, he's trying to run this as a business as best as possible, but like sometimes you focus too much on loyalty, instead of the bottom line, and that was like a real missed opportunity for him. Next, I was sort of giving up on talking about them because I didn't know what was happening next, but Maple Leaf Pro is bringing the Maple Leaf back to Toronto and more back to the former Maple Leaf Gardens on May 11th. MLP makes its Toronto debut at the Toronto Metropolitan University's Mattamy Athletic Center, with MLP North and Rising bringing professional wrestling back to the famous intersection of Carlton and Church Streets. But first, the road to Northern Rising will kick off in Windsor, March 14th and 15th at St. Clair College, with MLP Mayhem for another two-night extravaganza featuring the best of the world along world-class Canadian talents. Already announced to appear are The Nomad, Bishop Dyer, formerly Baron Corbin, and three-time Pro Wrestling Noah JT champion Kaito Kiyomiya. So I think this is obviously very Canadian thing to do. Firstly, relying on St. Clair, which is Scott D'Amore's like fallback, which is, I think, perfect. It works well. So for those that are confused or don't remember, like Maple Leaf Gardens, the original one, isn't like a big arena anymore. This is a venue that Ring of Honor ran all the time, successfully. I think it's about 2,000 capacity, so a nice stretch goal for Maple Leaf. They haven't been afraid of booking, several known talents before, and certainly like milking the Toronto market and broader Canadian markets that are close by or just a drive away. I could see it doing really well. Next, our friend Kevin Kleinrock, announced some big news, the next iterations of Masked Mania. Masked Republic, the industry leader in expanding Lucha Libre beyond the borders of Mexico. UTA, leading global talent, entertainment, sports, and advisory company. And Outback presents, the leading independent full-service promoter of live events in North America, have teamed to bring 2 huge live Lucha Libre arena experiences to the U.S. over Cinco de Mayo weekend, headlined by Ellie Park and Dr. Wagner Jr. The legendary rivalry heads to the Gas South Arena in Duluth, Georgia, and Bojangles Coliseum in Charlotte. This is May 3rd and 4th. So a double booking, less travel expenses and all of that, into markets that both have a fairly significant Hispanic community. Mass media events are all about family, both in and out of the ring. Doors open 90 minutes before. And all ticket holders can participate in a free meet and greet with many of the Stars events, additional VIP experiences. The Star-studded Cinco de Mayo weekend events will be headlined by the all-out Guerra Familiar. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. A family war tag team as LA Park teams with Hijo del LA Park in Georgia and LA Park Jr. in Charlotte to battle the legendary arch rival Dr. Wagner Jr. and his son Hijo de Dr. Wagner Jr. and so on. So really interesting to see how this brand continues to develop. These are pretty big venues that you can scale in various ways. Cinco de Mayo makes a lot of sense. I'd imagine, though, there's a lot of competition in those markets in terms of how one can enjoy the event, but really interesting to check out. Additionally, a talent that I've had my eye on, and actually through an intermediary pitch to come on the show. She wasn't looking to do that at the time. I'm not sure if it relates language or just not what she was seeking, which is all good. But Reality of Wrestling is proud to announce the USA debut of Noor Phoenix Diana, the first hijab wearing female pro wrestler and ranked in Forbes 30 under 30. It's just some of her matches were going viral. What was it? 2 to 3 years ago. She's been based in Southeastern Asia. Hopefully I'm not messing up the geography. She brings a certain different appeal, potentially relating to different target markets and so on. I think in a way, I'm surprised she hadn't made it to the States previously, but obviously complications and so on in terms of visa and that sort of thing, especially in a markets that don't traditionally have people travel as much to the States unless they're coming to a big company. There's not as much of that pipeline. I'm not sure where she's based now exactly, but maybe Malaysia or somewhere like that. And finally, in terms of the here and there, on brand, Chris GST, our friend and the one of the big wigs at PW Ponderings, as we are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, covered that the Wrestling Open is about to start a second show in Rhode Island, which makes a lot of sense, in terms of being in their market. After being teased by Drew Cordero last week, the Beyond Wrestling account announced that Wrestling Open would be expanding with a second show. The working title is Wrestling Open RI and will debut on the roads on the Pawtucket venue in Cranston, Rhode Island, which is kind of confusing to me. Like, Pawtucket is one area, Cranston is another. So I'm not sure how the names cross over there. Being presented by Cordero's food truck, which I think is his full-time business, Championship Melt Food Truck. I remember years ago there was like a controversy because he had parked the truck at a Ring of Honor show, and like the late Joe Koff came out and was like talking to him about it. Not sure what happened in the end of that, but that's an aside. Cordero tweeted, "This incredible opportunity for independent wrestlers looking to hone their craft and get a meaningful reps in front of a supportive family." So incredible opportunity to hone their craft. So we know, it's not a big payday. As it wouldn't be expected to be. Our programming in Worcester averaged 228 fans every Thursday, and 7 of the 18 WWE ID prospects are Wrestling Open regulars. So certainly an opportunity to get to him. It seems like he has a good relationship with Sapolsky, which is good. And if this is also streaming on IWTV, I think certainly the Wrestling Open is like the premier regular anchor for IWTV, and this would be supplemental or certainly in line with that as well.
Perfect timing, Lavie. We have a special guest joining us right now, Mr. Ross Bennis. Ross, what's going on? How you doing?
Hey, good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on the program.
Hi, Ross. So good to connect with you. So it was very interesting. I have many Google alerts set up that relate to
Okay.
pro wrestling. And one evening, an alert came across that referenced your book, which I found like the title and the picture absolutely fascinating. And that results to about the time I was 18 or 19, which is a very nostalgic time. And I think it's very like on brand. 1999, the year low culture conquered America and kickstarted our bizarre times. So we're really looking forward to diving into that. Let me turn it over to John.
So this is very, very interesting to me, the book. But before we kind of get into that, were you a fan of pro wrestling, and kind of where did you grow up? Because that's something we always try to establish. Because that usually is like, okay, if Northeast is probably WWF, or maybe no wrestling at all. But were you a fan?
No, I was definitely a fan. I'm gonna wear that same NWO shirt actually that you're wearing, but the reverse. I have a white one that has the black lettering.
Oh,
I was
nice.
more of a WCW guy at the time, and part of that was due to my town. I'm from Nebraska, and our town cable we had TNT and TBS, but not USA. So like my friend had USA 2 blocks away, and sometimes I'd go to his house and we'd watch Raw and we'd flip back and forth. But if I was at home, I just had to watch Nitro. But like I loved the Monday Night Wars, big time. Like that, I was super into it. Probably like that and football were like my two favorite things as a kid.
Man, it's funny. I was literally just my son was saying, "Oh, not that many kids." I mean, he's younger than obviously I was in 1999, a lot younger. But he was saying it's not that many kids like, but the teachers like wrestling. And I was like, "Oh my god!" I go, "Forget about it. When I was in school." I go, "Everybody liked wrestling. It was insane how many people
Oh
like
yeah,
loved
so I was 10
wrestling
years
back then."
old in 1999, and like it was the biggest thing. Like I remember like getting lunch on Tuesday, and you would just like talk about what happened on Nitro and Raw. Like that's the whole thing. That's all you would talk about at lunch hour.
It was quite the obsession. That's for sure. So, what in '99 do you think created this like lowbrow culture, if you will, this quote unquote lowbrow culture?
Yeah, because it's more than pro wrestling. And by the way, I love all this stuff that I cover in the book. I call it low culture. I call it trashy, but like I like it. I like wrestling. I like Jerry Springer.
Right.
I like Beanie Babies and porn. But what contributed to the popularity of so many of these things is like new technologies and media interconnectedness that happen alongside deregulation. So like each of the things I cover benefited from deregulation. Wrestling's case, it would be like Linda McMahon going around the country and getting, their taxes and state commission fees cut. And they basically, come out and kayfabe and people start to wonder what's going on behind the scenes more. That all helped boost popularity. Wrestling, though, that was a weird era for them in the late 90s. I think the competition brought the best out of both companies. Like that's why it's just so much bigger than it ever had been.
Very interesting kind of sidebar here that I was just thinking about. Have you seen the new Jerry Springer documentary on
Oh
Netflix?
yeah. Yep, I've seen it.
What'd you think of it?
I liked what they did with talking to the producers, and they kind of talked about the cultural significance. What I found was annoying is they got some Chicago journalists to just sit there and be like I'm on the moral high horse, like looking down on Jerry Springer and saying how he's a terrible person and Richard Dominic is evil, and they duped all these people who volunteered to be on the show. Um, you know, it is exploitive, but at what point do you recognize that people have their own agency? So that's it was a little like little too much moral grandstanding for my liking, but it was well produced, and I'd recommend it for anyone who's interested in the show.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice kind of behind the scenes look at some of that stuff, and really look because everyone was saying how popular Oprah was at the time. He was actually more popular than Oprah, so it's interesting to see that dynamic as well.
Yeah, and Jerry Springer, the fighting is a lot like pro wrestling, but then like you could say Springer influenced pro wrestling himself because Vince Russo, like his concept of booking was kind of based on Jerry Springer segments. So it went in each direction. And I think this stuff influences the culture so much more than people give it credit for. Like they write off wrestling, or in the 90s, they wrote off video games, they write off Jerry Springer. But when you have tens of millions of people who are super into this stuff, it's going to leave a big footprint. Jerry Springer, if you look at the style of talk show that was, that's everywhere in reality TV now. It's in our White House too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, big time. It is interesting too. Tom Green documentary just came out, which was, obviously he's popular around that time period too.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's interesting, all the nostalgia stuff coming back with the
I didn't
documentaries of
see the
that
Tom
time
Green
period.
documentary. I'll have to check that out. His
Amazon.
Okay, because the Tom Green, his first show before MTV picked it up, was 1999 when he got like his first own talk show.
Yep. And he used to have Canadian wrestlers, like local Canadian wrestlers on the show, destroying the set, wrestling, and doing all this crazy stuff. But he obviously has some minor ties to wrestling for sure over the years.
Yeah, he definitely. I'd say there's an overlapping fan base, and in the Tom Green movie, Road Trip, they like the thing that those guys bond over. This movie was filmed in '99, released in 2000. Is when they're coming back and they're cramming for a test, they relate everything to Breckin Meyer in terms of pro wrestling. I think they call Vince McMahon like Socrates or something. It was like the analogy they make.
Yeah.
And they're like, you like pro wrestling? And Breckin Meyer's like, who doesn't? That was kind of the attitude back then.
Yes. Yes. I just love the nostalgia stuff, like all the it all comes back. They want to relive 1999 all over again.
Oh, they definitely do. And we're kind of ripe for that time to be relived because nostalgia operates like on a 25 to 30 year cycle, so like Grease and Back to the Future and Happy Days, that was like the 50s happening in the late 70s and early 80s. So now is kind of the time when the people who were kids in the 90s are now adults, and they run things. They're executives at entertainment companies. They're helping, they're starting to raise their own kids. They're looking back on the culture of their youth, and you see a 90s explosion because of that. I'm looking at the stuff that's considered lowbrow, but gosh, every streaming service has rebooted something that you thought was dead, but it's come back again.
Oh my God, big time. Everything is coming back again. I love the cover of this book too, because it's Springer, Vince, obviously, video games, but ICP, our former guest, the Violent Jet. Love ICP.
Yeah,
yes.
I got the Jekyll Brothers shirt on.
Yes.
I'm down with the clowns. When I was watching pro wrestling, the music I was into, a lot of it was horrorcore type stuff, or new metal as well. But I love the Jekyll Brothers. I love Great Malenko. All those Joker card albums from the mid '90s. Me and my buddies were super into, and what I think is so genius about the Insane Clown Posse, aside from their wrestling connection, is they've gotten a group of people to just buy into them so hard, like, and it's so genuine. They've it's like the opposite of virtue signaling. Like they are like there because they don't give a damn what people think about them. They're going to come together as juggalos. I think that's something really special.
Now, I know Lavie's got a bunch of good questions. I'm going to hand it off to Lavie.
Yeah. So, Ross, it's interesting that, 1999, you were 10 years old and can sort of like reflect back and say like this was lowbrow culture, because for John and I, we're a little bit older. And like when we were 10, that was about the time you mentioned deregulation of commercial advertising directly to children and children's programming. So for us, it's an amazing time, like the mid 80s, like Masters of the Universe, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Thundercats.
Program length commercials, right?
Yeah, so it's like feeding us like commercial content, but like you could absorb this and it was amazing. So I don't want to speak for John, but like to us, like, yeah, like there was a certain lowbrow element. It wasn't necessarily like rough or like it was violent, but there was nothing like, you know, in terms of other ways potentially people could look back and whatever. But like I don't think we could separate it out and be like that was bad. No, that was amazing. So like how like as a journalist do you separate it out and be like 10 years old that's like the goal back and be like there was something off here.
So, well, first off, I just want to say the stuff you're talking about is in the book as well. I talk about the deregulation of advertising in the 80s because that helps create infomercials, and in the 90s that, you know, it started with like Ninja Turtles and Masters of the Universe, but eventually contributes to stuff like Miss Cleo and Girls Gone Wild. But when I was 10 years old, I wasn't sitting here looking down on this stuff and saying this is a lowbrow. This was just I watched Jerry Springer with my parents. I watched pro wrestling with my friends. I listened to ICP. The way I decide what to include in the book is like looking back now, what was the most mocked? Like, you know, if you read TV Guide, like they rated Jerry Springer the worst show of all time in '99. Like pro wrestling was like considered trashy. It didn't have quite the national acceptance that it does now. And St. Clown Posse is voted the worst band of all time by Blender magazine. So it's like what tastemakers thought of things is kind of what determines what's lowbrow here. But what's lowbrow is very popular. Jerry Springer was the #1 talk show of 1998. It beat Oprah, like John said. So, it says this doesn't mean like they're bad or unsuccessful or anything, but it's like what took the heat from the press. Video games were lowbrow in 1999. Like, God, go read old New York Times articles or watch old Nightline episodes about Doom and Mortal Kombat. It wasn't like talked about like today. People think of video games as art. So I'm using other people's perceptions because, like I said, I'm a fan of all this stuff. I wouldn't look down on it or judge anyone for liking it.
So one of my theories in terms of this time period, of course, there was problems in the world and everything like that, but to a certain extent, like middle class children, teenagers, and so on, and above, financially, demographically, like there weren't a lot of like problems necessarily to focus on. I believe Columbine would have happened already, but like generally, like you could sort of like compartmentalize, these terrible things, but for the most part, like you sort of like live free and clear. There weren't any wars and that sort of thing. So like the best way to escape that would be like things that are over the top. Whereas like let's say in the 1950s, people were still recovering from World War II. There had been a Holocaust, all these sort of things where like you want like to be fed something sugary and sweet and like the world is perfect now. Whereas like in the late 90s, for the most part, you wanted an escape that was very different from like somewhat of like a normalized reality in terms of financially and just like domestically.
That is an interesting way of looking at it. I guess I didn't quite consider it that way, but yeah, I mean, it was a time of relative peace. This is before the dot-com bubble, way before the Great Recession, before 9/11, before the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, America had it's hard to think about it. We had a surplus. We run such big deficits now. We had a surplus, economically, country was doing good. What I took though was more the deregulation stuff that I was saying earlier, because all these media companies got so much bigger, like Warner and Disney and Viacom, through mergers, and all these different rules like were repealed. So a movie studio could own a TV network, a telecom could become a cable company and could become a phone company. And as they got bigger, they pushed more content that was supposed to reach people as cheaply as possible because they're profit chasing. So like a lot of this stuff is made relatively cheaply, like including wrestling. Wrestlers aren't paid what professional athletes are, even if they had more eyeballs on the screen, because they have terrible contracts and aren't unionized. But like Jerry Springer, you know, that's something that's made super cheap. Reality TV, the like interconnectedness of those big conglomerates and them having less rules about what they can own led them to push this stuff that was considered trashy. That was my takeaway. But what you're saying, I think, has a lot of validity. I just hadn't thought of that.
So in terms of pro wrestling, so pro wrestling, as far as I think about it, like it's often influenced like what's going on in culture rather than being the thing to like change culture. So there's a couple of things where sometimes people think about it like ECW is already like doing a lot of like over the top cutting edge type of things, some of which holds up better than others. But at the same time, you also had like certainly South Park, which actually became part of WWE, of like holding up the Cartman doll, and Springer and so on. Like, what do you think was like the cultural spark, especially with WWF, which was fighting the like Monday Night War, where like there was an element of like pop culture where like they took from that and were like, this is something we're gonna use.
Yeah, I think they latched on to the 90s. Entertainment was more explicitly sexual than like 80s or 70s, at least on on cable television. No, that's Jerry Springer. That's Girls Gone Wild. It's like every teen show that was made in the 90s. There was like less the censors got less in the way than I think they did previously, and WWF at the time pushed it a lot more than WCW. They had Jenna Jameson doing Val Venus, my God. So the Attitude Era, I think, capitalized on what was catching on elsewhere, and they did it very well. I mean, who among us hasn't told someone to suck it and put their arms in and except their crotch, you know?
True.
There was all those high school, right? That like in the paper it was like this student got suspended because of doing this to their, saying this to their principal or wearing like whatever obscene T-shirt, at the time.
Yeah, I couldn't wear the like you couldn't wear the Hell Yeah Stone Cold shirt, but you could wear the 316 because teachers don't know what that refers to.
So I didn't even know what this meant at the time I wore it, and it was actually before they got explicit. But I went to the Monday Night Raw 5th anniversary special in the Manhattan Center, which was pretty awesome. And I don't know if you remember the slogan that said, "I get Raw on Monday night." So I had no idea, what that meant in any sense. I don't think anyone else did too, as I went to my private Jewish school, and I think it was like an activity or sports day, and I wore that all day, and nobody said anything or was the wiser to it. So as I gathered from the article that I found about you, without having people knock on your door and bother you, I think that you're in Westchester now, maybe a few stops away from me.
Yeah, I was surprised you found that article in because the River Journal is not like a widely circulated paper.
That's without doing any investigative work. That's my that's how I break news. I go deep into the Google alerts and I find things that other people don't. So so you're a few Metro North stops away from me. And coming from Nebraska, like our content, well, at least mine, I'm sure John is more worldly, but mine is always like that, like pro wrestling stereotypes, right? Like who's a character from Mississippi? Who's a character from California? And they'll act this way and so on. But like in terms of having exposure to two different, environments, two different states and cultures and so on, like, do you think like people say like now that like everything is New York? Like when I went to Nashville, I was like, maybe I should move to somewhere that's like a little bit more rural and calm, whatever. But it was New York. So like, do you think like the U.S. has sort of flattened out, that things are very similar, people absorb culture in the same way, or they each have their own flavor and there's different ways to appeal, especially like when we think about the business of pro wrestling?
I don't think Nebraska's like New York. in the way they absorb culture. And I bet a lot of the show, like, there can't have been too many people in Nebraska who are watching Succession, despite, how many articles were written about it. So I in general pop culture, I think they'd have a lot different taste. Now, pro wrestling, that's a tough one nowadays because, I mean, WWE is just so much bigger than everyone that any wrestling fan is probably watching the same WWE programming that they would be here in New York. I don't know if there's as much regionality. It's not like kind of the opposite of the territorial days now. Maybe there's certain characters that catch on there better would be a way of viewing it. But I'd say wrestling, the tastes are more similar than they are in general pop culture. But that's probably due to like lack of choices. A lack of choice if you're just someone who's getting it mainstream through your cable box or on your streaming service. You could find all sorts of wrestling on the internet, but you got to put in a little more effort to get that stuff.
So, as someone that's written about politics, has followed pro wrestling, I'm the author of Trump Mania. And I've become without getting too much into my own political leanings, I've become what they call a one-issue voter. So I could ignore a lot of other things because I have one issue that's very important to me. But one of the things that people are trying to figure out right now is who Linda McMahon is, and we certainly know from like a pro wrestling perspective, but sort of how that applies to if she's ever goes through a conferral process, we don't know. But if she goes through that and becomes the secretary of the Department of Education, like what will she do? Like, what would you speculate about that? We're all trying to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I know I'm, beating a dead horse here, but I what I would expect based off of her role as an executive in WWE is just pushing more deregulation, probably trying to cut school taxes as much as they can. I wouldn't be surprised to see like more school choice, charter schools, that sort of stuff pushed. But that's all just projection. I don't know her stance on those particular issues really. And it's kind of strange because she's being put forward as the top post in the country for that sector. And she doesn't have a ton of experience in it. So it's kind of tough to suss out what she really feels about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. What's interesting, and however we feel about Trump's second run here, is that it doesn't feel like it's been as extreme where like let's say like you'd have animal protection and it'd be like the person that ran SeaWorld or like or like environmental and it's like, oh, okay, they ran the Shell gas company.
Yeah.
So that'd be a good choice. It seems like I guess there's a lot of issues, but it feels a little bit calmer right now, I guess.
I don't know. Maybe we're just more used to it.
Yeah, I guess. Whatever. We'll make it work. There's something important to me, so we'll just move through the rest. Let me turn over to John.
Give us one last big push for the book and where everybody can get the book, 1999.
Oh, sure thing. Well, so just my general takeaway with the book is that the pop culture that is often mocked and put down is what influences the world the most. And we're living in a world right now that's shaped by the trashiest stuff in the late 90s, whether it's wrestling segments, Jerry Springer shoots, violent video games, Beanie Babies. All that stuff is still with us in a very big way. And you can learn more about that in the book. And you can get it on any website where books are sold. But if you go to the University Press of Kansas website and it's $24.19.99 as the code to enter, you'd get 30% off and free shipping, which would beat Amazon's price.
Nice. Now, where can everybody find and follow you on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you can just get my contact info or see my work at my website, rossbenish.com.
1999, the year low culture conquered America and kickstarted our bizarre times. So Great stuff. Love the artwork. Love the cover. It's a home
I'll have to
run.
tell the art director that you guys love that because he did a good job on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. But Ross, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ross.
Ross.
Take care.
All right, Lavie, let's hit the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website, patreon.com/TMPT Empire. What do you got going on, Lavie?
Yeah, on X, follow me at Laviemarg, LAVIEMARG. Candidly, my number seems to go down a little bit each week. I know that some people are moving away from X for Blue Sky or whatever, but John, if that's not the case for you, maybe that's just an excuse. But for those that remain, we're happy to have you following me. Check out my long-form articles on lioncubjobsearch.com. Trump Mania, certainly in the news again. So check out on Amazon the original book, the 2020 special edition. Soon I'll share about a special talk or panel I'm hosting at my employer. And glad to integrate PW Ponderings. Chris GST, his article this week. We are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, and we are distributed by the Creative Control Network.
All right. Thank you, Lavie. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.